So this episode is all about setting healthy boundaries with our mothers, and that is such a huge thing that I get so many questions about from so many women who are just like, okay, I'm an adult now, and my mama still be all up in my business, or maybe there's a mother who was trying to like be an empty nester and do her own thing, and she feels like
Oh,
her
okay,
daughter's
yeah.
too dependent. Like there's both sides of that.
I
So
can see that, right?
yeah, so I'm just curious. I wanted to talk about this term enmeshment, because I think when it comes to like mother-daughter boundaries that become unhealthy, that's kind of like the root of that. So, do you mind just describing for the audience what enmeshment is and how it can impact relationships between moms and daughters?
Yeah. When I think about enmeshment, I think about, well, first I'm gonna talk about boundaries and then I'll kind of weave in enmeshment. But when I think about boundaries, I think about them as emotional and physical and the psychological limits that we set in relationships that really protect our well being and they define how we want to be treated. And
Mm.
so a boundary, if we think about it, is like this clear distinction between where we are as a human being and then where another person begins. So when I think about enmeshment, I think about that there is no clear distinction between one self and another person's self. That in fact, the boundaries are not really there. And um, I'm a visual person, so I'm showing this, but I think this is audio. So sorry about that.
Oh
Uh,
no, I can cut some of this into some video too, so you can be visual. It's okay.
Okay. And so like the lines are crossed. So, where I start and end and where you start and end are they're not clearly defined. And so that's what I think about when I think about enmeshment. And I'm also a very visual person. So I think about there's not necessarily two distinct beings here.
Wow, that visual is actually so helpful because as many times as someone has described to me how important it is to set boundaries, no one has ever said it's the place where you end and they begin. And I just think that's such a beautiful illustration because it makes like any anyone that could like counter that idea, it makes it like gets rid of the people pleaser in me for some reason. I don't know why. Like,
Mm-hmm,
because I'm just like,
mm-hmm.
oh, it just makes sense that there's places where I end.
That makes sense too, right? And when we think about things or objects, like there's actually a physical beginning and end to this computer that we're on or that picture behind you. And the same thing for human beings.
Wow, that is so profound. I love that. Okay, so thank you for explaining that. So when we get to enmeshment and boundaries, what are some, like, can you give some examples for how this might look? And in a lot of relationships, these are things that are very normalized as well, which
Mm-hmm.
I want
Mm-hmm.
everyone listening to understand. So can you give like a few examples of it?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing that you mentioned, and I want to bring up something about like culture and just sort of personal or familial patterns, right? So what may feel like enmeshment to me may or not be that to someone else because of their own cultural or familial or personal boundaries. And I think one way for a person to really understand um, what enmeshment is also how it affects you personally. Like, is it affecting or eroding perhaps your own well-being or sense of self when another person, maybe your mom or your child, is so integrated, and not just integrated but almost sort of like overwhelmed, like sort of overwhelms you. So I think like integration is helpful, right? Or being able to be collaborative with someone is helpful. But when I think about like the enmeshment, it's overwhelming. It is eroding at your own well-being and sense of self.
Mhm.
Some examples of maybe boundaries or enmeshment. Trying to think of things that stand out to me. Perhaps it might be oh, here's one. Maybe
Okay.
for I have a young child and I do this sometimes, where like he'll have a booger and I'll just kind of go in and just try to get it, right? And it's not a super like, big example, right? But I think it's a small thing that perhaps for him, he's like, oh no, I don't like that, like ill. And so I think for him, he's not understanding quite exactly what it is, but I think to some degree he does. That my mom just stuck her finger up my nose to get something out, and I didn't like that. I didn't. It doesn't feel good to me. And
Oh.
so, his reaction is setting a boundary, a physical boundary. Like, I don't like when you do that. That's a very small example that I think people with small kids might be able to understand. But I think you can think about it in small ways and then think about larger examples in your life.
Well, I love that example. I think it's perfect because of the fact that like it's acknowledging bodily like personhood and autonomy
Mm-hmm.
no matter your age, right? So
Right.
like he's gonna have that reaction and then I think adults have it too. So I'll bring up a personal boundary that I've started to assert in my family and I'll give an example and we can go from there. So
Yeah.
my new personal boundaries, I don't really like to discuss romantic relationships, and I didn't realize how much discussion of romantic relationships is like relationship capital amongst women. So it's like everyone wants to get together and talk about men and what men are doing
Yeah.
and what men are not doing. And like those types of conversations, I can indulge in them sometimes. Like I'm still a girly girl, I can still do it. But I have just noticed collectively those conversations have gotten like super negative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I find it exhausting and it's not like a type of energy I can engage in often, right? So not only have I started safeguarding my own relationships, but I've also wanted to kind of like safeguard my eardrums from even like digesting all of the bad negative news about other people's relationships. So all that to say, because it's like a way of intimacy building in a lot of relationships,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Mm-hmm.
with women,
Yeah.
I have felt like I've been met with resentment about not wanting to share anymore. Cause like when I tell you, if I keep it between me, my therapist and my man and my pastor the rest of my life, I mean that. Like I'm good. For whenever, that happens. But for some people, they see that like you're withdrawing intimacy. You're not participating in the way that we used to be close now. So there's resentment there. So I just want to talk about like those to bring up your son's booger example, but those things where people are like, I don't like that. And someone's
Yeah.
literally like, you don't like that, but now you not liking that is making me feel bad and not connected to you. Like, how do we deal with the resentment that comes from being like, this is where I stop?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great example too for many women. I think we do get a lot of us get into a habit of sharing about romantic relationships, and also sometimes, I've seen where when things go wrong or people have opinions about your relationship. And I think for you, what you're describing is how it started to affect you. And that's sort of like what I'm pointing to when I say, for some person, that may be great. And that's how they build intimacy. But for another person, the reactions or what it's been bringing up may actually not be great and like emotionally not be a safe place, or they have found it maybe to be eroding at their sense of self or their well-being. And so you've decided that this is an area that I'd just rather not, that I have a certain subset of people that I do feel comfortable sharing. So it's not you saying I don't talk about it at all, I'm just completely silencing myself. What I hear you saying is that I'm erecting perhaps an emotional boundary, that I'm choosing who I want to be vulnerable with about this particular topic. And I find that to be helpful, and it protects my own well being.
Mm.
Now, I think the thing about boundaries is that sometimes as I see people starting to enact them and get comfortable, one of the surprising responses is when people's reaction to your boundaries is resentment or getting upset or like, no, what are you doing? And I find that people sometimes are like, oh, wait, am I doing the wrong thing? Because they're reacting wrong. Like, I didn't expect for this reaction, or that's not what I meant, or I didn't mean to, to make you angry or to be upset. And it starts to feel uncomfortable to continue to set this particular boundary that you're setting.
Yeah, yeah. And that's been the hardest part of setting them because, especially with like personality shifts, that I think for some folks, personality shifts are ignited by trauma. And I think that there's even things in my own life that I can point to that I could be like, okay, this changed my personality. But I think what gets frustrating is when people are like, keep connecting your present personality changes with things in your past. Ah, and so then that also gets frustrating with boundary setting because like me saying like I want to keep this area of my life private now becomes like, oh, you're just doing that because this happened in your past or this happened and you need to free yourself from that and let that go. Now be open to sharing that with me again. And like I appreciate your perspective on it because it's literally like how I feel is valid. And I I don't know what it is in like some unhealthy normative unhealthy relationship dynamics when like just saying like, hey, we may be different. You feel good to sharing that and I don't, but that doesn't make me a bad person. Like what happens there on both
Yeah.
sides?
One thing that helps sometimes is sort of having empathy, for yourself and compassion also for the other person in terms of how they're experiencing it. Because we're all set up differently. We all have our own sort of ways that we go about this world. And so for you, if you've shifted or you just decided that like this feels safer to me in this particular time in my life. And here's the thing, like boundaries shift over time. Like we don't always have the same boundaries. At one point in your life, you were comfortable talking about these. At another point right now, you're not. That can change or it may stay the same. But being able to allow people room, I think, to grow yourself or to change over time, to decide for yourself how you want to act or how you want to interact with other people, great. And then also, I think being thoughtful and compassionate about the other person's response, not just the response, but the impact that it has on them and how they're feeling about it and what it may mean for them. So what I find is that most people, when they have a reaction to a boundary, they're not saying, um, oh, I miss you, or I'd really want to be close to you. And that's why I want to talk to you about this. Um, they might probably just be reacting from frustration or anger or resentment. But what's actually underneath this is, or maybe I feel rejected, or maybe I don't actually know how to communicate with you, but I really want to. And I really want us to have this deep connection, right? That's a lot of time what's way underneath, but what you're getting is the huge reaction. And so sometimes it's helpful to be thoughtful about perhaps this is what the other person is really saying. Now, it may not change your boundary. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that because the person really wants this from you that you have to give it to them. It just may help in terms of your own experience of them and the relationship that you might see their reaction from a place of compassion, and it may not breed as much resentment from you.
Mm. I love that the level of empathy like we require to navigate these changes and but I also want to like go to the part where maybe the incompatibility is too great and it's just like healthy for the other for both to go no contact. I'm speaking in the case of
Sure.
mother-daughter
Other
enmeshment.
daughter. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Um, and this one is a difficult one, but I assume that listeners who are coming in and want to hear about this, they sometimes they want to improve their relationship with their mom, or sometimes they have like a mother wound or a mother gap, and it feels like irreparable, which is sometimes the case because we know that boundaries can be really upsetting. And there was one boundary that I had to set with people assuming that I could comfort them at all times. I didn't realize I had built my world around being like a community comforter. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually am not, I don't actually have as much emotional capacity to like comfort people all the time as I thought I did. I actually lean more intellectual than emotional these days. I'm just a little more stoic. All that to say, the amount of resentment that I was hit with not being able to be a comforter.
Mm-hmm.
It's been
Mm-hmm.
very painful to me as an empath. And because I'm an empath, I could feel the pain of the other person when they were calling me and I'd say, hey, I just don't have capacity to be on the phone anymore on this, or I can't even take this call right now because I have to do this. I could feel their pain that I couldn't show up for them.
Yeah.
But I also knew like there were too many repeated instances of it happening where I realized like, oh, they're not going to get it. Like they're going to keep wanting me to give them the old
Yeah.
me. And I
Yeah.
can't be her anymore. She's died. She shed skin. So what do you do in that case where there's a mother, even like a daughter to a mom, a daughter who's still expecting her mom to be that comforter, and that's not a role
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
mom even wants to show up at because maybe she's a hot girl, empty nest. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
what do we do in these situations where it does not seem like we can meet an impasse, which is heartbreaking but real.
Yeah. I mean, I think honoring the heartbreak, I recognize that, particularly when we're talking about like mother and daughter relationships, for many people, that is such a sacred relationship. And for many people, it's not, for many people, it's not safe. But I think, at least probably in society, we idealize it. And so I think even if your relationship is not that, that you're also maybe coming against that idealization that makes it difficult to grapple with. And at the same time, if you genuinely believe and feel that what you need is space or a shift in how you're relating to someone, even if it's your daughter or your mom, it doesn't mean that you don't love them or care about them. It may just mean that you need to show up and relate to them in a different way.
Mm.
And sometimes relating to folks that we love in a different way, for some people, it also does mean distance. And, I think about relationships as not like finite, or definite, meaning that one relationship may not be and probably is not going to be the same for the entirety of your life or the entirety or duration of that relationship. But I think relationships can kind of ebb and flow. They're kind of like seasons. There may be seasons where you're really, really on and really, really close and kicking it tight and talking and all the time and sharing all the details. And there may be times where you're less so, and maybe times where you may not even speaking to that person, whether it's because you're angry or just life happens. So I think honoring that sometimes the quality of the relationship or just sort of the way that the relationship is may shift over time, but it doesn't necessarily have to erode the love and the respect that you have for another person and for yourself can be helpful.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause there. So I feel like I said a mouthpiece.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that because when people are reacting to boundaries with like resentment or like emotional withdrawal or all of that, like for folks who are experiencing that, for them to not have to immediately think it's going to always be like this,
Yeah.
there can
Yeah.
be hope in these changes because even though I'd say over the last few years, I've lost more friends than I ever expected. I
Mm-hmm.
can't say the friendships and the relationships with my family that stayed, they are stronger because I just literally had more energy to invest in the ones that had
Mm-hmm.
hope. So,
Yeah.
um, now I'm gonna speak on behalf of like the mamas out there who may be navigating toxic relationships with their children.
Yeah.
And, I I'm not a mother yet, so I can't really speak to this, but I imagine going no contact with something that came out of your body
Mm-hmm.
would probably feel like the most impossible thing to do, even if the mother is feeling like this child, this adult child
Yeah.
has not cut the cord. They're still expecting me to mother them, whether that's in, taking care of them, still living off of them, emotionally, taking from them.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you could speak to the mother who may be listening to this and needs to set boundaries with their child, but they're just too heartbroken to even do that, or they risk and feel that pull of like, if something happens to my child while I take space from them, it's my fault, That's
Yeah.
the heart of what I hear moms who struggle with this deal with. So I'm just curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of empathy for that, and a lot of compassion for it. And I would encourage moms to have empathy and compassion for themselves. I think that's the first thing I would say. And also to listen to themselves. I would say that if a mom, given the tendency for moms to really, really care about their child, no matter what they do, but if there's something inside of you that is saying that the way that we're doing this relationship is truly, truly hurting me, then I think that's actually pretty significant because it's probably much more than one might actually understand or know if you get to that point.
Mm,
Um, and I think it's okay for anyone in any type of relationship, including a mother with their child, their adult child particularly. if they need to shift the way that they're relating to their adult child. And I think about adults as having agency and responsibility, and to some degree, like sometimes a mom and parent might have to allow that child to have that responsibility and kind of make peace with their inability to kind of control the situation. And I think sometimes also for parents, this idea of wanting to control can be something that's in the mix here that maybe we're not really saying, or maybe it's not for everyone, but sometimes it is.
That's
Um,
fair.
that might be also a piece of this, and kind of letting go of that control and trusting, that your child, an adult, will find their way, and that you also need to find your own way. And I think I just also want to honor the shifting in terms of identities and roles that any person has, and particularly when we're talking about a parent and a mother, like what a mother is, or how they identify, or what that looks like, is going to change in the life cycle of a child. So what you give to a child when you are um, carrying them, or when you adopt them, and when they're young and they're infants or babies, looks a lot different from when they're toddlers to school age to teenagers to adults to older adults. Like what that looks like will shift over time, and I think that it's okay, and there's beauty in that shifting over time.
Absolutely. I want to like spring back to what you were talking about with some mothers who may be really struggling with setting boundaries between themselves and their adult
Mm-hmm.
child, and how there could be that control thread lingering there. And that's why I want to bring it back to what you said earlier about boundaries being that area where you end and they begin. And that's why I think this conversation is so important, because for the moms who are struggling, like, I think what needs to happen is that demarcation point of like,
Yeah.
I don't have control because this is literally where I end as a person.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
autonomy of this adult who is my child, but an adult where they begin. And it's like their journey and their way. And I also really appreciate how you brought up for a mother to get to the point where she needs or wants to go no contact or to take significant distance from her child. It is possible that whatever's happening is significantly toxic enough, and like to have grace for yourself, because if it got to that point, it's most likely justified. And I mean, it's all justified no matter what, but just
Yeah.
empathizing with how extreme it could get for a mom for it to be there, I think is just really helpful.
I want to
But
like highlight what you just said, like the word toxic,
yeah,
because when we think about like mothers and daughters and parents and children and families, they're for many people like the most significant relationships maybe that they might have in their lives, the most significant or important, or at least that's what society says. And these relationships, what we know also sometimes they're significant in ways that are can be detrimental, that sometimes, unfortunately, they may be the people that hurt you the most. As much as families can be the people that love and protect you the most, we also know that families can also hurt you the most. And so using terms like toxic, or it may not always be said, but sometimes parents or children or family members can actually be abusive.
yes,
And I think that if we don't use sometimes that language, then it can be hard for the person who's experiencing the abuse to really um, understand that that is what it is, and that's what's driving the need to separate. And I appreciate you using that term, because I, even myself, like sometimes I hesitate to say these kind of terms, but the truth is sometimes families are abusive, sometimes mothers, sometimes adult children are abusive,
yes.
and that may be the reason or the driving factor, or maybe they're toxic, for this need to separate. And so, I just want to honor that that is what it is sometimes, and it can be very hard if that's the case.
I'm so glad that you use the language abusive, because I do feel it's this term that is hard to accept, that there's a lot of abusive behaviors that are normative.
Mm-hmm.
And and you can add your professional definition to this, but abuse to me is like anytime someone says, no, that doesn't work for me, I don't like that, and the other person either subconsciously or consciously coerces their way into getting
Hmm.
them to do that,
Yeah.
does not honor the autonomy and the individual choices of a person. And
Yeah.
so when we bring it out of that definition, it may seem like, okay, well, I never do that to someone, but it's also like, okay, but if you call your mom and she doesn't pick up, are you angry with her? Are you screaming at her? Are you
Yeah.
asking her over and over again, like, why aren't you picking up the phone? Or for a mother, if your daughter doesn't pick up or hasn't talked to you in a few days because maybe she's working and you're telling her, well, I'm just never going to call you again.
Yeah.
I can't believe you aren't serving me in this moment with your energy. Like, I think people have a hard time of like acknowledging that that is a form of the attack, isn't a form of emotional abuse. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's an important thing to consider and to say. Um, and I often also feel like the person experiencing it is the arbiter of that. So you know what I'm saying? Like and sometimes it is also just sort of pretty black and white. Like this is what we define abuse. But also I think you yourself, as the person experiencing it, if this feels abusive or manipulative or toxic to you because of how it affects you, then that's what it is.
Yeah, maybe it would help us to outline what some of those effects would look like in closing, so people could maybe have some like indicators of maybe this is a place where a boundary should be set. So like, for
Yeah.
example,
Go ahead.
yeah, like
But can you give me your example? Because I love where you were going with some of those things.
yeah, just feeling drained, like
Yeah.
completely drained after a conversation and like I wasn't like someone called me and they just dumped on me everything that they're going through or everything someone else they know is going through. And there was no like ask about how I'm doing or I'm functioning. I have to set boundaries with people who function like that because I have to actually have capacity for that level of like drain. So
Yeah. Yeah.
feeling drained is
Mm-hmm.
an indicator for me that there might be a need to set a boundary in how I'm interacting with someone. So if there's something like that, just so anyone listening could be like, well, do I need to set a boundary? Like maybe just some signs they can look out for physically, emotionally.
Yeah. I think feeling drained, exhausted, feeling perpetually ashamed,
Hmm.
um, uh, feeling like manipulated or like, just sort of psychologically or physically wounded or unsafe.
Hmm.
Um, Perpetually feeling disrespected, you
Hmm.
know. And I think that to some degree you might feel ashamed as an emotional experience sometimes, and sometimes you might feel rejected. But I think, to really, I would say to see the distinction in terms of consistent,
Hmm.
um, and try to think about some other examples of things I've seen from folks.
I think great. That's a great
Okay.
starter. Like just even taking an assessment after you have interactions with people. And if consistently you're feeling like drained, exhausted, like eroded emotionally,
Yeah.
physically, psychologically over
Mhm.
time versus like a one-off instance, because humans are gonna have
Yes.
disagreements,
Yes.
incompatibility. It's not toxic if you get into a discussion and you both don't agree. Like,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it can be toxic if it's happening and the other person is like emotionally and it's definitely physically wounding you because of a boundary or something that you say makes you uncomfortable with where you are in your life. So I just think
Mhm.
that's really helpful. And even like some like physiological reactions,
Yeah.
like sometimes after certain people, this may sound like weird, but I can smell the difference between when I'm having a stress sweat versus a
Uh-huh.
normal sweat. And so
Wow.
with some people, I can actually like tell when they're triggering the part of me that's like more stressed in the interaction versus when I'm like interacting with someone and they're just chill. So even like the way you sweat or the way you smell for some folks, I don't know if there's other somatic things, maybe like your stomach, like some
Yeah.
people stomach aches or
Yeah.
discomfort interacting with certain
Discomfort in your, yeah, any of those things I think are significant. And the level of awareness that you must have to be able to know that, I want to just plug because no, I genuinely mean it because I think people, I would encourage you to really be aware and to pay attention
Yes,
because
yes,
your body does tell you, and sometimes we're not paying attention to it.
yes. I love that. That wraps up the interview that I have for now. Is there
Okay.
anything else that you felt like it was important for us to share about boundaries? Because, for some folks listening to this, this may be the first time they ever even think like
Yeah.
about it, or some
You know,
people don't even know what it means.
right. I think the only thing I would just say is that as you're enacting boundaries, especially for the first time or at the beginning stages of this, just expect that it's going to be uncomfortable for you. And also expect that people may have, different reactions. They may not always like the boundary that you enact. Sometimes it's also just because the relationships that you have the kind of form habits, so people are used to being a certain way, and so changing that just kind of shifts things. So that might be a part of the discomfort for you and for them. But then also just so that's important to just expect the discomfort. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't set the boundary. Just because it doesn't feel comfortable or because someone has a reaction doesn't mean the boundary is wrong. And sometimes we have to persist with the boundary, even if the other person doesn't like it, if it is something that psychologically is safe and protects us and is necessary for our well-being.
So good. Thank you so much, Akilah, for being
You're
on the
welcome.
podcast again. I know that so many folks are going to just be blessed by your wisdom. And if you want to just like plug where people can reach you, follow
Oh, sure.
you, yeah.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at drdr.akilah, Akilah. And then also, I'm a part of a private practice called the Black Girl Doctor. And so if you're interested in therapy, coaching, workplace wellness with myself or with any of our other fabulous clinicians, please, join us. And it's theblackgirldoctor.com, but also you can follow us on Instagram at the Black Girl Doctor.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Akilah. Thanks for being
Thank
on the
you.
pod again. And yeah,
Thank you. I'm excited. I'm honored to be on it again.
oh my gosh, it's our joy. And yeah, if any topics or anything you ever want to discuss, like feel free to just like hit me on the side. Like this is a
Okay.
two-way street. So you can just be like, Keyaira, I think we should be bringing this up. This is something that's like bubbling in the psych community when it comes to mom-daughter relationships, especially Black people. And I just think I need to be on the podcast and talk about this. I will say yes. So just
Okay.
just know
Thank
you can
you.
just come to me with anything because this is so important. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. And if you have anything else or need anything, let me know.
I will. All
Take
right.
care.
I'll talk to you
Bye.
soon. Take care.
Uh-huh.
Bye.